welcome to another series of St. Michael's College Presents Solutions for Social Impact. My name is Ruth Fabian-Fine. I'm a professor here in the biology department. And the topic of today's series is feeling overwhelmed, how to spot the signs and address approaching burnout. And I would like to hand the microphone to Jessica Tetreault, who will start to introduce the speakers today.
Thank you, Ruth. I would like to introduce Dawn Ellinwood. She is the Dean of Students here at St. Michael's College, and this is her 11th year. Dawn has over 35 years of experience in the academic field at 5 different colleges. She has 3 degrees from Northeastern University, including a bachelor's in education, a master's of public administration, and a master's of education. Dawn also has a Doctor of Education from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. We are pleased to have Dawn with us today to share her insight. Please welcome Dawn Ellinwood.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm honored to introduce you to Tim Mackin, our esteemed College Associates Dean, who will be sharing his insights on burnout prevention. Tim earned his PhD and Master's in English from Johns Hopkins University and his BA from Colgate University. He has worked with numerous professionals and students in various academic settings. Tim Mackin's position at the Associate Dean's Office makes him a valuable resource for students seeking both academic and personal support on campus. His upcoming talk will share practical strategies for identifying, managing burnout. He will also provide insights into how to balance self-care with professional, academic responsibilities, a topic that is essential for anyone seeking to achieve fulfilling and sustainable lifestyle. Thank you.
Today I'll be introducing Bridget Atkins and Kathleen Butts. Bridget Atkins is the wellness coordinator at St. Michael's College. She is also a certified health and life coach, women's cancer care coach, and has a master's in curriculum and instruction. Kathy is the director of counseling at Bergeron Wellness Center. She is a licensed clinical mental health counselor and licensed drug and alcohol counselor. She has a master's in family therapy and 30 years experience in the mental health counseling field. Please welcome Kathy and Bridget Atkins.
And we are now starting first with some student presentations, and Sean Clem, who is a senior in Neuroscience, will start with this presentation.
So, today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the cell and molecular neuro aspects of the burnout syndrome. And a lot of the research that I had done came from one peer-reviewed article, and it contained in it a very comprehensive definition of burnout syndrome, and I'd like to share that here with you today. So, burnout is generally recognized as a work-related stress-induced condition associated with memory problems, fatigue, a sense of inadequacy, and depressed mood. Now, I know that's a lot, and I'm going to break down the symptoms a little bit further from this definition. So first we have work-related stress, memory problems, fatigue, a sense of inadequacy, and depression. Now, one of the major key players in burnout is this work-related stress. Now, stress is defined as stress hormones being released by the body to have a physical effect on the body and the mind. Now, there are physical implications of burnout as well. So I talked about the stress hormones, and these stress hormones, or glucocorticoids, are released in increasing amounts. So this concentration is increasing, which leads to the immune system to be downregulated, or loss of function, and then subsequently reduced formation of neurons within the brain, also known as neurogenesis. Now, what is neurogenesis? Now, the prevailing hypothesis that currently exists is that in the adult brain, new neurons cannot be formed. However, there is an exception to this hypothesis in that in the hippocampus, which is located right here in the brain, functions in learning and memory, and also has a function within neurogenesis. So we do see new neurons being formed here. Now, again, the hippocampus plays a very important role in learning and memory. And numerous studies have shown that individuals who are highly stressed, again, have this increase in the production of stress hormones. And there are many different stress hormones, but I'm going to be outlining cortisol, adrenaline, and glucocorticoids. And over long-term exposure of these stress hormones, we start to see negative effects on the neuron's growth and formation. Now again, just to recap. So chronic stress and increased stress hormone productions can lead to a decrease in neurogenesis in the hippocampus, downregulation of the immune system, which can lead to higher incidence of infectious disease. And finally, and this one is a little bit morbid and is very serious, but the downregulation for DNA repair mechanisms. And unfortunately, this downregulation in DNA repair mechanisms can increase the risk of cancer. So we have this study that we have looked at, and this study uses rodents as its participants, and we have looked at 2 different comparisons within 2 different conditions. So as you can see here, this is the neurogenesis aspect of this study, and then we also looked at the formation of these dendritic connections, and these dendritic projections. And these dendritic projections, as well as neurogenesis, are very important within learning and memory. So the 2 conditions that we have here, we have a negative control condition in which the rodent was stressed and received no other treatment. And then we have the experimental condition in which the rodent was stressed, however, it was also given, or it was also exposed to higher levels of antidepressants over a long period of time. So if we first look at the neurogenesis aspect of the study, we see here, and this is the classic condition in the way that these black circles here indicate the proliferation of new cells within the hippocampus. Now, in the negative control with just the stress, we see that neurogenesis is actually being downregulated. As you can see that there are less circles here. And similarly, when we look at the dendritic projections, we also see that they are becoming downregulated in response to stress. And now we turn to the experimental group, and we see some interesting findings here. So these individuals were stressed, or these rodents were stressed. However, again, they had been exposed to some level of antidepressants. And again, we can see here that neurogenesis is actually promoted in this case, as well as when we look at the dendritic projections, we can see that they are increasing. And this is very promising in the area of burnout. Now we wanted to look a little bit more into the results of the study, and I'm going to invite Taylor to the stage. Taylor is a junior neuroscience major and has aspirations to attend medical school in the future.
Thank you, Sean. So what Sean has just explained here with the dendritic branches and arbors is beautifully explained in this publication by Warner and Dumont. So I'm going to read off this quote here, and then I'll explain what we're seeing on the right. Stress exerts a profound effect on neurogenesis, leading to a rapid and prolonged decrease in the rate of cell proliferation in the adult hippocampus. And as Sean explained earlier, the hippocampus is critical in learning and memory. So here on the right, this is a visual representation of the neurons in the hippocampus. On the left, we have our control rodent neuron in the hippocampus, and you can see these beautiful elongated dendrites and arbors coming off the neuron. And then on the right of that, we have the neuron in the hippocampus of a chronically stressed rodent. And you can see, it's very striking, The dendrites on the right, so the dendrites of the chronically stressed rodent are much smaller and lesser in number. There's fewer. And so this gives us a great inclination into why people and individuals who are chronically stressed cannot remember new information or easily learn new information. So if we look at stressed individuals, what are the factors that lead to this chronic stress? Who's at risk? And throughout literature, and this is not an extensive list, but these are the most common factors that can lead to chronic stress and burnout throughout literature. So a demanding or rigorous educational program like a postgraduate program or education at an Ivy League school or a very demanding job. Another factor is the number of time-demanding tasks an individual has. We also live in a society that puts pressure on individuals to not only do their best, but be the best. We value perfection. And with the rise of social media, it's now easier than ever to access the lives of those who are rich or famous, which can easily lead to feelings of inadequacy. Another factor is administrative burden. And this also kind of ties into our last factor here, which is difference in objectives. And what we mean by this is, I'll use an example of physicians in practice and administration. Physicians, their goal is to heal patients. And another goal of theirs is to be able to finish their notes at the end of the day on time using the electronic medical record. But the administrative goal is to make sure that their financial responsibilities are also met. And these are clashing objectives because administration needs the physicians to see as many patients as they think is possible, and it just doesn't clash with what the physician can reasonably accomplish. So how do these causes and factors manifest in these individuals who are affected by chronic stress? So these individuals feel exhausted and drained emotionally, mentally, and physically. And they suffer from sleeplessness because at night when they're lying in bed trying to sleep, these thoughts are racing through their head. They're going through the tasks they didn't complete that day that they have to, and now they're behind. They're going through what's due tomorrow. They have these deadlines they have to make, and it's truly overwhelming. And also, another part of the sleeplessness is their stress. So like Sean was mentioning earlier, these stress hormones are running through their bloodstream. They're becoming more and more stressed. It's compounding. So depending on the amount of stress of the individual or their personal resilience, it can alter their mood and how they normally would respond to emotional events. They're struggling to concentrate, remember things, pay attention, and which is explained by the cellular evidence of the stress hormones leading to the downregulation of the cell formation, as Sean explained earlier. And this lack of concentration and attention leads to a feeling of less productivity. So when you have this heavy workload and this list of tasks that seem to never end, it can feel like it's compounding and truly, truly overwhelming. It can be difficult to cope with your everyday small occurrences when you're under this amount of chronic stress. And this chronic stress and negative emotions can really affect your mental health. It can also affect the way you feel about your job. You lose the enthusiasm that you used to have about your hobbies, your career, and also the loved ones around you, your relationships. So now the question is, who are the groups of people who are most at risk for developing burnout or chronic stress? Anna will now go into depth about this. She is a rising senior neuroscience major who has the hopes of pursuing medical school soon.
Thank you, Taylor. So as Taylor said, now that we know what causes burnout, Who does it affect? And I did some research on it, literary research on it, and I found that there are two main groups that are affected by burnout, which are teachers and those who work in the healthcare field. And I found an interesting article regarding children in China, which I would like to bring to your attention as well. Now, to start off, I found an article regarding teachers and their amount of stress and burnout during the COVID pandemic. And it found that 72% of these teachers were feeling very or extremely stressed, 57% were feeling very or extremely burnt out, and that maintaining an adequate work-life balance was very difficult as well for them. And this is seeing that 20% said that they only sometimes had adequate work-life balance, and 30% said they never had one. And being the daughter of a 5th and 6th grade social studies teacher, I can attest it's very difficult for teachers to maintain this adequate work-life balance. They try to, but it's just difficult with the demands of this particular job. And so the children in China, this article caught my attention because it looked at the higher and lower socioeconomic levels for families and how their children were affected with burnout. And it found that those in the higher socioeconomic families experienced less burnout than those in the lower socioeconomic families. And they attribute this, the researchers attribute this to the higher socioeconomic children having greater access to financial resources and spending additional time with their parents than the lower socioeconomic children. They also said that the high socioeconomic parents ensured that their children would participate in cultural, social, and recreational activities, which helped to decrease their amount of stress and burnout. Finally, I found another article about physicians and residents and their amount of stress and burnout pre and during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the researchers discovered that there was an increase of 200% in their feelings of being emotionally drained due to their occupation, and there was a 324% increase in their feelings of being down, depressed, or hopeless. And residents also experienced worse burnout than physicians, primarily due to having longer work shifts, and longer work shifts and longer work days. But they also said that prior to the pandemic, both physicians and residents, about 50% of them experienced stress and burnout, and then due to the unknowns about the COVID-19 pandemic, all of this just helped to increase and enhance their feelings of stress and burnout. So now that we know all of these numbers, we wanted to see how stress and burnout impacted the St. Mike's community as a whole. And so I'm sure many of you saw the survey that we sent out a couple weeks ago. Thank you to everyone who was able to complete it. And I'd now like to invite Dr. Fabian-Fine to present the results from that survey with me.
Okay, thank you, Anna.
So our first question that we asked was, who are you?
So, and we were very pleased to see, so we had a total of 183 responses, and of those responses, we had 28.4% of St. Michael's College students that participated. So we had on-campus students, 64.5%. We had commuter students, and we had St. Michael's employees that participated, so 28.4% that are not student population.
Our second question was for students to say what year they were.
And there again, we were very pleased to see that we had an even distribution of students from different years. So we had first-year students, 14.3%, then sophomores, 19.5%, then 30.1% of junior students, and 31.6% of senior students. So we had a representation from all years for this survey.
Next, we asked, have you ever experienced the feeling of mental burnout, where daily activities feel overwhelming and become more difficult to cope with compared to other times.
And these results we find really staggering, because if you look at this, we have, can I see this? So if you look at this, we have only 1.1% of our participants who were not affected by burnout. We had 9.8% that were only once or twice affected by it. Then we had 41% that were affected by it multiple times, and 48.1% that feel the feeling of emotional burnout constantly.
Next question was, on average, how long did this mental burnout last?
And here we found that almost half or more than half of our participants, it lasted for a number of days. And then in 26.8%, it lasted between 2 and 12 months, so which is relatively prolonged period to struggle with symptoms like this. And 18% of our participants struggled with this for over 1 year.
Next, excuse me. Did you share your experience with others who went through a similar situation?
And this is also a finding that we found very interesting. The majority of people who were affected with this type of burnout were looking for professional help, whereas 28.4% did not look for professional help.
And then we asked, if you have ever experienced mental burnout, please select which of the following topics may have contributed to it.
And here, what you will see is these will be the majority of our participants have work overload. So you can see all of those ones here. We have family expectations, family problems, then fitting in, social stigmata, job demands, and all of these problems here were very prevalent for our participants, but by far the biggest was the overload in work demands.
Our next question was, what resources, if any, have you sought on or off campus in response to burnout or mental health concerns?
And here the leader was Bergeron, and which is why we are very happy that we have Kathy here today. Then therapy, and I was very surprised about this, but very pleased about this as well, that help from professors, so that students actually go to professors and face this problem head on, probably because of the workload, which is then for students given by professors.
Next were, what types of resources would you like to see on campus?
And here we had more sports events than personal finance resources, so advice on how to handle finances, that financial stress seems to play a big role. Then meditation groups, existing resources for grad students at appropriate hours due to late classes, then fitness classes, and lounge options where students can go and hang out, and even it was suggested that in those lounges that it would be prohibited to learn and do homework, that this is purely for entertaining and relaxing purposes.
And another question we asked was, what are some ways that you practice self-care or a physical creative outlet that you enjoy?
And here I found very interesting that besides all the expected answers like cooking, exercise, being outside in nature, yoga, music, reading and drawing, one option that somebody chose was cleaning. So it seems to have a therapeutic effect on some of us.
And finally, do you have any suggestions that would have helped you to address mental burnout?
And here, more sun, which is in Vermont sometimes difficult in the winter, then persons to confide in, talk to professors, taking mental health days every once in a while, setting boundaries, and last but not least, quality of sleep. And I just wanted to show you why quality of sleep is really so important. And this is something that I realize all the time, that students, but also employees of St. Michael's College are awake very late and you can see that in the emails and texts that you get at 2 o'clock in the morning. So we really need our sleep, and I want to show you the brand new research that we have that really supports that sleep might be the secret to a healthy mind. And what we are showing here is that neurons in our brain, and these are healthy brains, they have metabolic end products, and these metabolic end products are removed from the brain, and this is something that we are just really understanding. And what we've discovered is that neurons have canals, and we didn't know that before, and you can see this in this picture here. Neurons have canals, and during the day, these canals are likely closed, and these debris particles accumulate in close proximity to those canals. But during the day, as the nervous system is active, these canals are closed up because they would interfere with the functionality of the neurons. And the hypothesis is that these canals then, as we fall asleep and the transmitters die down, we are not releasing as many transmitters, these excitatory or activating transmitters, that these canals then open up, and you can see one of those canals here, and that's another serial section, and here it is at the electron microscopic level, and you can see this canal is open, and these debris particles are now pulled into those canals and cleaned off from the brain. So if we don't sleep, the activity in our brain doesn't go down. In other words, these canals do not open up, and this debris cannot be removed from the neuron and may interfere with the functionality of those neurons. And this is what we believe is what we see in these neurons. This is, for example, one that is filled with debris that will make it very difficult for those neurons to function, and ultimately they actually may undergo neurodegeneration. This here is a neuron in our spider invertebrate organism. However, we compare everything we find in our invertebrate organism also with the rodent and human brain. And here you can see the same similar neuron in a human brain. These structures are way smaller in the human brain than in our invertebrate brain. I've magnified this here a little bit, and you can see that we have the same problems that we are accumulating. This is the brain of a 76-year-old patient who died, and we can see that in his brain we also have those neurons that accumulate this debris. So I would like now to hand over the microscope to Kathy Butts, because what struck us in the survey was that there are students that don't seek professional help. And my question to Kathy is now, what would you advise those students or those employees at St. Michael's College to how to approach their burnout?
You're asking about students who don't choose to seek professional help, right? Well, one of the things that I wanted to say today was that I think it's really understandable, and I guess understandable is the word. I think that burnout today is really understandable because we are living in a culture that is moving at a really fast pace, and the fact of the matter is that our brains, I guess I want to say evolutionarily, our brains are not keeping up with the changes that are happening in our culture. And so what that means is that it puts an extraordinary amount of stress on our human bodies and brains on the daily to just keep pace with the lives that we have. And so I just wanted to kind of normalize the experience of anxiety, of stress, of burnout among all of us, students, staff, and faculty. And that I think that there is, we actually have to work really pretty hard at, it's kind of like another thing to do, but at taking care of ourselves in the midst of all of this. And I think it's on all of us to support each other to do that, and also to really think about in our own personal lives, like what are the steps that we can each take. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is how, really it's only been in the last not very many years that we've spent so much time inside, for example, and that our bodies and brains are meant to be outside and in connection with nature and in connection with kind of the natural cycles of life. And so again, just something as simple as getting yourself outside every day for a period of time is going to do wonders for you, for me, for all of us. So I guess I'm just using that as one example, but I think there are many. I think we've talked about sleep, the importance of human connection, the importance of connection with animals, the importance of connection with our friends and family. I think staff and faculty, like we are a community here, and I think just reaching out to each other and providing and allowing ourselves to receive support in whatever form that is really, really important. I think exercise, adequate nutrition, all of those basic things that we sort of can take for granted. I guess the bottom line for me is that we can't take our mental health for granted in the same way we can't take our physical health for granted, even young people, I think as I'm getting older, I'm much more aware of that, but I think it's true for all of us as I watch students challenged by the pace of life and all of the various demands. I just think that we have a lot, we all have a lot to pay attention to in terms of our own well-being. And I don't mean that as like, here's one more thing you have to do, but more like really valuing yourself and valuing your right to rest and your right to some quiet and your right to some outdoor time, and just thinking of it more in that way as a nurturing, a caring for yourself. Those kinds of things really can go a long way towards preventing burnout for all of us. And I think I saw up there that a student had said like setting boundaries and saying no. I think for all of us, I think that's really important. Again, this pace of life right now, which is so quick, there are so many demands, and it's really hard to say no, but I think it is important that we all know where those limits are. And part of like the learning for all of us, especially for young folks who are in college right now, it's like learning where are your boundaries, and we all make mistakes with that along the way, and I'm still learning myself, so I say that with all humility.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dawn, and as I was preparing for this talk, I thank you for the nice introduction. And I've been in this field of student affairs on college campuses for 35 plus years. And as I'm sitting and thinking, marveling at the difference in the student experience today versus when I first started in the field, and then when I was a student. It's extremely different. And what is different? Kathy just mentioned how fast our world. When I was in college, when I first started in this field, we did not have access to news, phones 24/7. If you're having a sleepless night, you can pick up your phone and you can start going through TikTok or whatever, right? All of the social media and access to information at our fingertips is having an impact on our well-being. And I say that, I have the phone right underneath my chair here. I'm on it, I use it, it is a tool. But it really has caused, I'm not gonna just say students, but I'm focused on students, but humanity to judge themselves against others, as was mentioned by Taylor, right? The feelings of inadequacy, keeping up, the feelings of being perfect, and I just overall comparisons. How does that add into our mental well-being and our burnout? I'm not going to ask for a show of hands here, but how many times have you saw something and it gave you a moment and you paused and you're like, ooh, that person looks really good in that picture. I don't think I look that good, or whatever it is, right? What we're seeing on social media is not real, right? I have an 18-year-old daughter. It's a battle, right? Not a battle, she's pretty good about it, but me trying to send the message, that is crap. That is not real. And there are filters and everything that makes everybody look different, right? So how are we being impacted by this 24/7, easily accessible social media news? How is that impacting us? So that is really the difference between now and then for me in the work I do. And I actually remember when, before it was Facebook, it was like MySpace or something like that, and how everybody was horrified by this and how privacy, and look at where we are now. We can't live without it, right? So, as I was thinking too, how do I handle the job I have, which is pretty much 24/7 at times? I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a mom, right? How do you balance that? And all I can say is, as Kathy just said, I'm still working on it, right? I'm a lot older than most people here, and I am still working on it, but what is at the center of how I go through each day is I try to get to bed by 9:30 if I'm able to, because I get out of bed at 5:30, check my email, sickness, right? And I respond, and then I go for over an hour walk. It's over 4 miles. That's my connection with nature. It's my time, and it just slows my brain down. And I listen to a book on Audibles, usually. I'm reading a really good book now if you want to hear about it. But so I need to do that for myself, to come to campus then to be my best self, to do my work, right? Part of my work is absolutely working with students, supporting students, their families, but also it's supporting my staff. And part of my work is noticing when one of my staff members has had an extra busy week, or there's a lot of balls going on campus or at home, and really supporting that person to take some time. It's okay, the work is not going anywhere. How do you take care of yourself in this? I'm a big proponent of vacations. And when I came to St. Michael's, it wasn't in to take vacations. And I'm like, okay, that's changing. We need to plan time away for a long weekend, a week, whatever you have and able to do, we need to do that. So I kind of demand that my staff, I sound like an ogre here, but that they take vacations weekly. We wish weekly, right? Yearly. What are your planned times away? That's a constant conversation I have with my staff. That's how important it is, because if you cannot rest, if you cannot recharge, if you can't breathe, you're not able to do this very important work, okay? And when it comes to supporting our students, St. Michael's, I'm going to brag a bit, does it incredibly well. Ruth, you spoke of how students, when they feel overwhelmed, they go to therapists, but they go to their faculty members. How wonderful is that? That is wonderful. And I also want to say, residence hall staff, the staff at Bergeron, and I'm just looking at academic support, Tim Mackin's office. And I want to talk about a team that we have on campus. We just renamed it to the CARE team. And it's a small group that meets weekly and is made up of a variety of different offices that support students across campus. Academics is there, academic support's there, Bergeron is there, I'm there, residence life is there, public safety is there. And when a student is noticed on campus, we meet and we discuss and we talk about what are best next steps forward for that student. Who is going to reach out to that student and support? I'll use an example. If a student has missed a week worth of classes, that's a red flag. You shouldn't be missing classes. So we check in with that student, what's going on. Okay, you can't get far behind in class, so how do we connect them to Tim, to their faculty, and if they need extra support, Bergeron or someone in residence life or at student affairs in general. So we talk about supporting students who may be burned out or just trying to isolate and just closing out the world. That's important to do, but we need to do it in a balanced way. Because if you don't go to class, you're not going to be able to stay here. So how do we do that in a balanced way according to what that student needs? It's very individualized because we all bring to the table something different. So I just wanted to highlight how we approach support of students when we hit a wall. I'll call it burnout hitting a wall, right? And when is it that time when we had to walk along and say, okay, and check in all week if we need to, or walk them over to a certain office. We notice and we try to support and help students to then balance self-care with their responsibilities in the classroom and outside the classroom. So I thank you, and that's just thoughts for today, okay? Thank you.
So I have the microphone, so I'm just going to go ahead. Thanks. Also, just tell me if I mumble, because my wife tells me I always mumble when I talk in public, so if you can't hear me, just shout out. So just to follow up on some things that Kathy and Dawn have already talked about, we each have our offices that cover different things, but when we try to help students who are in situations like the ones that our students today have described, thank you for that, by the way. I was worried that what we do wasn't going to line up with the biology, so I felt very relieved that it all aligned. We all work together on this kind of thing, even at my area's academics, but the conversations I have with students always start with things that aren't necessarily academics. When students come to me overwhelmed, students actually don't use the language of burnout that often, but I think it's given it fits with a lot of things that everyone's saying. The first thing we talk about isn't academics. It's a really hard moment because when students are really overwhelmed and might even be to the point of burning out, I want to say a little bit about the language of burning out in a second. What they really need is capacity for some self-assessment at a moment that self-assessment is really, really difficult, right? As the panel shared, there's these feelings of inadequacy that can bubble up and like stress builds on itself. It's not a great time to make judgments and perceive who you are and how you're doing. But it's a moment that requires that. So the first thing we try to do, a lot of us who work with students, is the first thing I try to do in my office is slow things down, try and let students know where they are. Like, you're struggling right now. Now's not necessarily the time to really make broad judgments about who you are and how you're doing, right? And let's talk about where things are. So the first thing that I always recommend in various ways is other people, right? The statistic that came from the survey, this number of people isn't seeking professional help, and Bergeron is usually the first thing I recommend when a student is struggling, but counseling may not be for everybody, but help can come in a lot of different ways, right? The reason therapy dogs and cats and roosters, which we've had, exist in the world is for a kind of help. When you check your self-perception or what's going on with you against someone else, it takes you out of your head a little bit. It's a little bit of a reality check. Anxiety spins in on itself in a way that can lead to a real spiral. So talking to someone, the first thing is support networks. It could be Bergeron, it could be RAs, it could be our office, it could be professors, it could be friends, it could be family, right? Talk to someone, get a little perspective outside yourself to see those things. It can be hard to do. It just can be grounding. Anyone who's been to therapy knows that it's not a magic wand. We're not going to go to, Kathy's wonderful, but I probably wouldn't go to her and be like, I am suddenly better on everything that I struggle with, right? But it is that grounding, that perspective that says, what about this? Are you sure it looks like that, right? Are you sure you're really failing, or are you just having a hard time right now So that's the first piece, is other people in some form or another. That isolation can really make a difficult situation much, much more difficult for you. And then we slow down and try and look at things practically. And this is a way that we can, lots of us can help you offload some of the executive functioning skills that can be compromised when you're feeling tired and burned out, right? If you've got 3 papers and 2 tests and a couple things that are in a lab that's late, you might look at that and be like, holy crap, I don't know how I'm going to do this, all of this, right? It's a lot easier for me, who doesn't have to do any of those things, to help you make a plan for them, right? So we can sit down, again, take that out of your head, put it down on a piece of paper and say, let's work on this Tuesday. You got a paper? Let's make a writing center appointment for Wednesday, right? There is a lot of practical help to help you get through those assignments. One of the things I say to students all the time when they have papers is, they're like, I'm a good writer. It's like, I totally believe you're a good writer. The writing center doesn't just have to be for when you're struggling with writing. It can be when you're struggling to get started, right? If you got a paper due Friday, you make an appointment at the writing center on Monday, and you show up with the assignment and a blank page, that's going to be productive. When you sit down to write that paper, you're going to be that much further along. We all are, I would imagine we all know the feeling of the blank page blinking at us over and over and over again, right? So there's lots of practical pieces that we can, peer tutoring and seeing professors in office hours and the writing center and all those pieces, right? But again, the executive functioning skills, when you're feeling overwhelmed, where you feel like, I don't even know how to do this, we're here for that. There's lots of us that are here for that. We can actually help plan. We spend a lot of time in our office doing those sorts of things. And there can be times when going back to the language of burnout, which I don't love. I've bored my fellow panelists with saying that I'm not crazy about the language of burnout. Just because it's not just because it's a metaphor, but the metaphor is one where it's done. You're done. You're burned out. The flame is off, right? And that happens sometimes. And there are occasionally students who just can't go on, right? Which is what burnout suggests to me. I just can't do this. And we have tools for that too. You can take medical leave. There are many ways to take a pause. I would say that's rare. In most cases, what students are actually feeling when they come to talk to us is they're feeling diminished. They're not as capable as they'd like to be feeling or as they used to be feeling, right? And that's ways we can coach you through. There's lots of different strategies for that. And, one of the things I'd add is that I don't know, ask your parents. There's no person I know who doesn't go through days when they have to show up to work when they're not at their best, right? This is a life skill. I'm not saying it's easy. We all struggle with that. I'm speaking for everybody, but I think probably accurately, that we have to show up to work every day when we're not at our best. There's a person in front of me. I need to be present for that person. Even if I'm struggling with some things myself, I'm not feeling 100%. I'm really worried about my brain after that sleeping slide that Ruth was showing. In most cases, students get to the other side of it. Maybe you don't get an A, maybe you get a B, but sometimes pushing through that thing that you can't think you can push through, learning how to reach out to the people that can help you get through it. You're still doing it. You're still doing all the work, right? You deserve all the credit for that. But there's something that can be just as meaningful, perhaps more valuable sometimes in the long term, about getting through that moment than it is just like getting the A. I hope you get the A too, right? You could do both. I'm not saying that's not possible. But that skill is hard to develop, and is going to be essential throughout your life.
Thank you. So I am Bridget Akins, the Wellness Coordinator, and a little bit about my job is I am here to plan activities and education and things for students. And I did appreciate the idea of the lounges because we do now have the Zen Zone, a shameless plug here, next to the dining hall where you can just go and chill. But I do think it would be nice to have a sign that says no homework, like it's not what it's designated for. We have those things on campus, but the other part of my position is to do a wellness screening with students, and they answer many of these questions about physical health and mental health and substance use and those types of things. And a couple of the notes along the lines of what others on the panel are saying. One thing I always try to remind students, though, is we often overlook or put off what we're feeling. So if we're feeling a little bit stressed, or if we're having like maybe a couple headaches, or if we're feeling really tired, oh, it's just because I'm doing this, or it's because I'm doing this. And sometimes when we don't address those things sooner than later, that's when we get to this burnout, or that's when we get into a mental state that our mental health is struggling. And I think so acknowledging when you start to see these signs that yes, stress and anxiety are common and are healthy for everyone to have a little bit to, so it tells us like if our body or if our mind needs something, and how do we push through those things. Like Tim was saying, that's important to learn how to move through those things. I also talk a lot with students about approaching these things with like curiosity and judgment. If you look and you know you're exhausted and you know you have all of these assignments and you really want to improve your sleep, and you start with like, okay, I'm going to try this, and you're going to sleep, you're going to go to bed 30 minutes earlier, and it doesn't work, like you don't do it. That's okay. It's not a failure. Like, why didn't you do it? You can ask yourself that question, and then you can start again the next day. When I think a lot of us in these comparisons and in a culture that kind of feeds that is if we set a goal as simple as going to sleep 30 minutes earlier and we don't do it, then it's like, okay, I'm just not going to do it. I couldn't do it. But I think so just treating ourselves, with curiosity and judgment with whatever we're facing. I'm glad sleep was brought up a number of times. There are resources on the back table for those who are here in person. If you're on Zoom, those will be available in the Zen Zone outside of the dining hall. But there is a sheet on creating your own power down hour. So all kinds of ideas that you can do the hour before you go to bed. I know sometimes that is unlikely for a college student. So again, don't dismiss it because it says hour. It could be 15 minutes if that's all you can do. I also wanted to mention, too, that engagement is a huge piece, especially on a college campus, for faculty, for staff, for students alike, that we have lots of events such as this. We have lots of activities going on, and part of our mental health, our physical health, our overall wellness is connected to being engaged in our community and connecting with other people. So I wanted to mention that. And then there was something else that someone brought up about valuing yourself. I think it was you, Kathy. And when I meet with students in individual meetings, so I do group wellness sessions, but I also have individual check-ins with students that last 15, 20, 30 minutes. And it's really just a time for students to chat about what's going well, maybe what's not going well, anything that they want to chat about. But sometimes we talk about that we have all of these things on our calendar, and we wouldn't miss a class, or maybe we wouldn't miss a practice, and all of these things are on our calendar, that sometimes we need to schedule ourselves on our calendars. And we need to do that so that we treat ourselves just as high of a priority as we treat all of those other things. So if you're struggling with fitting in self-care time or just a little time to take a breath, look at your calendar and put it in there and treat it like it's a class, or it's a presentation, or it's a game, or it's a practice, and just see how it goes and see how that works for you. So again, there's resources outside on the back table for those that are here in person, and for those of you on Zoom, they will be in the Zen Zone.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to mention one part from the professor side, and this is that I often see that students are overwhelmed with all of the workload that they have. And there's a piece of advice that I would like to give how I handle that when I have too much on my plate where I don't even know where to start. And the example is that my neuroscience students we made some brain sections and we've labeled them for a certain molecule. And what they found was all these red dots on their images. And I said to them, now compare the red dots on this image with the red dots on that image. And I could see that the students just conked out, oh my God, how many red dots do I have? Where do I even start? And what I said to them is, Put a grid on top of your picture and select 10 grid boxes from each image. And then just deal with these little grid boxes and take the numbers that you have from that. And this is how I would, or how I do it for myself and would recommend it to students. Put everything you have to do in little portions. Deal with one of them first, complete it, and then put it aside, and work each of your grid boxes off. And that will slowly then get rid of the workload that you have and this burnout that you feel through this, because it's all weighing on you. You have to do that. So this helped me a lot, and I know that it helps my students as well.
I wanted to say one more thing that I was thinking about as I was listening to other folks, and that is that I have had the privilege of working with many students over the past 12 years, and I've seen so many students turn things around from being in a really tough spot to getting through that and to getting to a place where they feel like they can manage what's happening in their lives, and then feel like they've learned a ton from that, and then feel like they have more resilience and they're ready for the next time life throws something hard at them. And that, to me, it's just, I just want to hold that out to folks and just say, like, I have so much hope about that, and I think that all of us have the capacity to get through hard things, and yeah, we just do. And the more we do, the more we know about ourselves, the more we believe in ourselves, and then we're better set up for the next time something hard comes along. So I just feel lucky that I've been able to see that, and it's inspired me in my life to watch students get through hard things, and I've learned a lot from students along the way. And I just think that there is a lot of wisdom in the student body. I think that you all have a lot to teach each other, and I hope that you reach out to each other, but also to faculty like Ruth. I think a lot of faculty offer so much support to students and so many good ideas about how to manage things. Our office is certainly available. Tim's office, we all work well together, Dawn, Tim, and Bridget and myself, as well as many others on campus, just to support students when that's needed, but oftentimes students find that support in other places, and that's great too.
We should ask, are there any questions from the audience?
Oh, got you. So my name is Madeline. I'm a fifth year, so I've been here for a little bit. I experience ADD, so I was just wondering, because I love everything that you guys have said, but unfortunately for certain students, they also have the problems that their brain chemistry just isn't the same. And for me, if I tried to do the grid box thing, eventually I would have gotten bored, right? Like, I have tried to lay it out in more organized lists, and I find, honestly, tricking myself into playing games is a little bit, so I'm just wondering if you guys have flexible tools for people with ADHD, ADD, autism, stuff like that.
Sure. I mean, one tool that comes to mind, which is not exactly the kind of tool you're talking about, is students with documented learning differences can take a reduced course load, just to have fewer boxes on the chart, right? Students at St. Mike's can, and Madeline, you may know about this already, you probably do, but you can kind of spread out your course schedule a little bit, take 3 courses during the semester and the 4th in the summer or winter. So that's one tool. In terms of specific study skills, yeah, I remember I used to be in the Writing Center, and there were, one of the things we would go over is there's some strategies that aren't, Tony Missouri, who's the director of accessibility service, would come and teach the class. And there are some strategies that are not necessarily, not always, but not necessarily going to work well, like sort of certain kind of brainstorming techniques, like the kind of thing you were talking about with if you have ADHD, is going to you'll just go off on tangents, right? So, and some of it is thinking about learning style, like if, some of that, like visual learning and ADHD can go well together or not well together, right? So it's like thinking individually, you can work with, it might be a peer tutor, it might be Tony's office, giving particular advice to faculty about certain kind of things. They can be specific accommodations, or they can be just sort of advice of what's going to work. Yeah.
Other questions?
I just wanted to add on to that. I appreciated the question, and I think just to know that there are, I think in each of our different spaces, the effort is made to just individualize and help a student figure out really, okay, here's a menu of options, like what's really going to work the best for you, and help you experiment with different things and try out and see what works. And because you're right, we all bring different challenges to the table, and what's going to work best for one person definitely isn't for somebody else. So thanks for bringing that up.
I was just going to add on to that a little bit too. When we do student check-ins and have those conversations and wellness sessions, we often, when individuals want to talk about it, we try to find something that they feel like they're good at, or something that they enjoy, and the patterns that are associated with that, or the kind of strategies you wouldn't even think about. And then with a little bit of experimentation, like Kathy said, try to say like, okay, well, if you feel like you're really, focused, or you're really good at this, can those also be, maybe brought over to academics? And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but it's just a thing to look at, like, is there something that, kind of allows you to stay focused, or allows you to feel more calm, and then maybe those same things can go over to another subject.
I also just wanted to quickly talk about being kind to yourself and really giving yourself the grace and forgiveness. That's something I'm working on right now, this week. We're not perfect, and I think it's okay to have semesters where you might have made Dean's List a couple times and now you're struggling in a class. It might be an upper level philosophy or an upper level science, and that's okay. I think we have a lot of hyper-competitiveness culture on campus, specifically here. This is a beautiful college. We have some of the best professors in the United States. It, I think, is a prestigious college. The type of education quality you're going to get here it's a privilege to be here. It truly is. And I can say that knowing St. Mike's, this is my third college that I've attended, and I mean, the education I get here, it's amazing. But it's also okay to have a semester where Orgo is really hard. So I'm taking Orgo 1 right now, and it's been difficult. It hasn't been easy, but there is this culture where it's kind of seen as a shame amongst my peers, not with professors, if you struggle in Orgo and you're open about that. So I'm trying to change that culture, trying to talk about it more with people and discuss that, like, it's okay to struggle with a class and not be perfect. And I think I'm just calling on all of you to go along with this culture. Let's change this culture. Let's talk about this stuff more. And I think the first step is talking about burnout. Right now, I think I am burned out when I look at the symptoms and I reflect on how I've been feeling this week, and I've had a great support team. Ruth and Adam and other people and my therapist have been really supporting me this week with organic chemistry and how I feel about my future and the future of med school. And so I just want to say, be kind to yourself and be kind to other people.
Are there other questions?
You briefly mentioned that there are symptoms for like burnout. I missed like the first 30 minutes, so I was like, if you could like describe exactly like what are the signs of like burnout.
Multiple of us can probably touch upon it, but in my slide I talked about the first symptom is a feeling of extreme exhaust and feeling drained emotionally, physically, mentally, a very large task load that leads you to feeling unproductive. Someone mentioned too feelings of comparison, and I mentioned feelings of inadequacy. So mood changes, it does affect your brain chemistry, it affects how you feel about yourself. So then you're reacting to situations differently than you normally would if you weren't feeling stressed. Difficulty coping with everyday tasks. So when something small happens, a small bump in the road, it's really detrimental to you. It really ruins your day. You can't get over it. You can't stop thinking about it. You have insomnia, so you're laying in bed at night unable to sleep because you have these racing thoughts about what you haven't done, what you need to do today, what you didn't accomplish, what's due next week, and it's compounding stress. And then I think probably the most significant part is loss of interest in your job, life, your relationships with people, what you were passionate about before the burnout, and your hobbies, things like that. Yeah, so.
Yeah. One of those things too, like tying into the loss of interest, a sense of like questioning, like, do I really belong here? Am I really doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Or maybe I'm not seeing the results that I would like to be seeing. So like that self-despair and being like, oh, well, like if I'm not doing this and getting said result, like if I'm not doing X responsibilities and getting Y result, then I'm failing. And that was actually one of the things, one of the last things that we put up on the survey is fear of failure. And many students selected that as one of their answers for what does burnout, like what has led to their burnout. And I know for me and myself, like, again, I'm a neuroscience student along with Taylor, Anna, and Jessica as well. And I didn't take the most traditional path. Like I didn't start low and then get high, like get better grades and do everything and be super involved. However, like with the opportunities on campus and with help of other people as well as like Kathy and as well as Tim, I created a path for myself and I created a plan and I really like personally persevered. However, it's not a one-size-fits-all model for overcoming what you're going through. Like what I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I have all the answers because I don't. However, it is in knowing yourself and it's in knowing where you wanna be. And that's why I believe like, especially self-care and just being patient with yourself and all of those other aspects as well, too. Are there any other questions?
I'm not sure of this, but like, do faculty have like a process when it comes to like students who have like a really bad attendance rate? That is like, because I know like midterm warning grades, but I feel like, is there like something prior to that like may like sound some alarms and things like that?
I didn't catch the last part, Layla, but but the question was, do faculty have a process about dealing with students who haven't been able to make it to class regularly?
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah, basically, our faculty, do they have like a process of like making sure that students are like attending classes? And like, are there like ways to like be aware if that's not the case? Besides like grade term warnings and things like that, is there like warning signs that?
Like how do you know that you have not been going to class?
Yeah, like how do faculty know that their students are not on top of things?
Fair enough, right? You might not have the awareness of the extent of it, for example. Like you might know a particular day or several days. Yeah, I mean, I think, and Ruth might want to chime in too, every faculty does attendance, thinks about attendance differently. I'm generalizing, but generally faculty, I would say, I don't want to speak for, we have faculty here. So, but my sense in my conversation with the faculty is they're kind of expecting students to know when they've been to class and not been to class, right? And they are available to let you know what if they're taking regular attendance, what your attendance record would be. You know, but I also understand that if absence has happened frequently, it's hard to know what the exact number is and add that up. So that's when you ask. What would be my advice, right? Like there's not any. Individual faculty may have established systems when they let you know. It generally tends to be by email, like, just want to let you know you've missed 4 classes and we should talk, or something along those lines, right? But there's not a regular systemic institutional way to do that. It's generally a responsibility that students will know whether they've been there or not.
I'm glad you asked this question. And I would say it's another one of those cases where one doesn't fit, you know, you can't generalize on one example. There are some students who every so often miss a class, and then when they miss 2 classes, then I know, okay, I need to reach out because there's a problem with a student. Other students miss longer times, and that's usually when then I work with Tim's office mainly, because then there's a more profound problem with the student, and then Tim has to handle that. But in most cases, the students are just having bad days or struggling with personal things. And this is one of the things that I really love about the college, why I wanted to be at a smaller institution and not at the big institution. Like I was at Frankfurt University with 30,000 students enrolled at this university. I was one in like hundreds in my audience, in the auditorium. I didn't count and my struggles weren't recognized. Whereas now, when somebody in my class is missing, I recognize it and I can take the student and say, can I help you? And that, I think most of my colleagues do this. And this is what I really like about St. Michael's College. Okay, if there are no more questions.
I actually have one last question. Okay. Yeah. We talked about, you know, a lot about how to kind of recognize stress in yourself and how to seek support if you need it. I wondered, on kind of the other side of things, what kinds of signs should you look for in others who might be experiencing stress or being overwhelmed, to make sure that you're also helping support them?
I'm going to start. I'm not an expert in this by any sense of the imagination, but in my thoughts, I talked about how I noticed my staff, right? First of all, I have a lovely relationship, professional relationship with each of these people, and I know them. And you notice if something is not right. You know how they show up to a meeting. They may call out and not be on campus for a day or two. I just make a note that I need to check in and say, hey, this is what I'm noticing. Are you okay? And 9 times out of 10, it's something that's it's not small, but it's not serious, right? But noticing when someone's had really difficult time work-wise because of student issues that we've had to address and work with students on some hard things, I need them to take some time for themselves, and I name that. So it's noticing the work and it's noticing how they're showing up. And I'm talking about staffs. I don't teach a class at this point, but even when I was teaching, you get to know your students and you know if they're showing up in a different way. And noticing that and having a conversation, right?
I think that's the key right there, is just noticing changes in a friend or a colleague, and asking, I think, is the big key. And oftentimes when we start to get overwhelmed, we pull back, we shut down, and we may not be taking care of ourselves in quite the same way. And when you're close to people, you can see that happening. And so I like to encourage people to just trust yourself. If you're noticing those things, then ask and let people know that you're concerned about them, or you're wondering what's going on and that you care.
Another plug for the resources outside. We do have these things, courtesy of Active Minds, that when it's more than a bad day, and this is for yourself, like things that you can do. And then for that question, how to help a friend. So there's the signs to look for, and then there's also sometimes it can be hard to breach the subject when you're not sure what's going on, even with a friend, or you know something's going on and you don't know how to ask it. So there's some just kind of steps, questions to kind of break the ice.
I'm not a teacher, obviously, but I'm a friend on campus, and I think that besides offering advice and listening to them, you could also just be their friend still and go have fun if they have time. So like this past weekend, I could have been studying, but I decided that I really needed to go to Chinatown in Boston with my friends. So we drove 3-4 hours down to Chinatown, and we had hot pot, and we walked around Boston and went into all kinds of different little shops, and just had fun and were friends and just were people in that moment and not students. And I think that's important when most of your days in the week are spent as a student, or for people who are mothers, most of your day and your week is spent as a mother. So important to like nurture you as an individual, and I think that's a good role that friends can play, is helping be a friend and not always doing things academically related or venting, just having fun.
Okay, well, thank you so much for attending this, and thank you so much for your contributions. I have learned a lot. And I hope to see you at the next seminar, which is about the biodiversity in Vermont, and Declan McCabe will present this, and what we can do to support biodiversity in Vermont. So I hope to see you then. Thank you.